The crystal chandelier above the head table caught the light perfectly, but all I could see was the venom in my new daughter-in-law's eyes. The wedding reception was in full swing, filled with the joyful chatter of over 100 guests. I had just stepped up to offer my congratulations when Chloe leaned in. Her voice was a sharp whisper, but it carried across the quieted room. The best wedding gift you could give us would be leaving this family for good. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. My son, caught completely off guard, froze. Chloe offered a smug, victorious smile, assuming she had successfully humiliated me into submission. But she didn't know who she was truly dealing with. I didn't cry. I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I calmly set down my glass of champagne, pulled out my phone, and made one single call. 15 minutes later, her smile completely vanished. My name is Evelyn, and at 28 years old, I've already learned that the most dangerous people are the ones who smile while trying to ruin you. I am not the typical widow people expect. I built my own successful financial consulting firm from scratch before I met Arthur, a brilliant man 20 years my senior. We had a beautiful, deeply respectful marriage that tragically ended when he passed away last year. Arthur had a son from his first marriage, Leo, who is 32 years older than me. Because of our ages, I never tried to be Leo's mother. Instead, I tried to be a supportive friend. When Arthur died, he left the vast majority of his commercial real estate empire and family trusts under my sole control, knowing I had the business acumen to manage it. Leo received a generous allowance and a high-level position at the firm, which he seemed content with. That was until he met Chloe. The moment Leo introduced her to me, I felt a distinct chill. Chloe looked at our family estate not with appreciation, but with raw, unchecked hunger. To Leo, she was a sweet, self-made angel. To me, she was a transparent social climber who assumed that because I was young, I was naive and easily manipulated. During family dinners, she would drop subtle, passive-aggressive hints about how tradition dictates that the family assets should belong to the son, not a young stepmother. I chose to stay quiet, ignoring the petty slights out of respect for Arthur's memory and my genuine desire for Leo to be happy. But Chloe mistook my silence for weakness. She truly believed she could push me out of my own family, completely unaware that she was playing a game she had already lost. As the wedding drew closer, Chloe's behavior transformed into a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Whenever Leo was in the room, she put on a flawless performance as the doting, sweet fiancé who wanted nothing more than peace. She would gently touch his arm, smile warmly at me, and make sure he saw her acting like the perfect future daughter-in-law. But the second Leo turned his back or left the room to grab a drink, the mask completely slipped. Her sweet smile would instantly harden into a cold, venomous glare. In those quiet moments, she made sure to let me know exactly what she thought of me. Once, while we were alone in the kitchen, she looked at my designer watch and whispered that a woman of my background didn't belong in a house this grand. Another time, she deliberately ruined a catering menu I had spent days organizing, only to look Leo dead in the eye later and tearfully claim it was an accident on my part. When Leo wasn't looking, Chloe also began making increasingly bold financial demands. She pressured Leo to ask me for a massive increase in his monthly trust fund allowance, claiming they needed to secure a luxury penthouse before the wedding. When I firmly denied the request, citing the strict guidelines Arthur had set up, Chloe made sure I paid for it in private. She whispered to me in the hallway that my time at the top was running out. Still, I chose to hold my tongue. I didn't want to ruin my stepson's happiness right before his big day, and I knew that reacting to her petty provocations would only make me look like the villain. Chloe took my restraint as absolute proof that I was terrified of her, completely convinced she had already won. The grand ballroom of the estate was a masterpiece of white roses, glowing candles, and classical music. It was the kind of wedding that screamed opulence, paid for entirely by the estate funds I managed. I sat at the family table, wearing an elegant champagne-colored gown, keeping a polite smile on my face for the sake of the guests. When the time came for the speeches, I walked up to the head table to hand the newlyweds a beautifully wrapped envelope and offer my congratulations. As I reached out, Chloe leaned in close, ostensibly to give me a warm embrace for the cameras. But instead, she gripped my arm tightly and whispered with absolute malice, "The best wedding gift you could give us would be leaving this family for good." The microphone nearby caught the tail end of her sharp words, and a collective gasp instantly rippled through the surrounding tables. The music seemed to fade as a stunned silence fell over the room. Leo's glass froze halfway to his mouth, his face washing over with sudden panic. The guests stared at us, their eyes darting back and forth, waiting for the massive explosion or the tearful exit. Chloe maintained her smug, victorious smile, her eyes glittering with the satisfaction of a bully who believed she had just delivered a fatal blow to my pride in front of everyone who mattered. She expected me to burst into tears, to scream at her, or to run out of the venue in utter humiliation. Instead, the warmth completely drained from my expression, replaced by a profound, icy calm. I looked her dead in the eye, slowly set my champagne glass down on the table, and pulled out my phone. She had no idea she had just crossed a definitive line. I turned my back on the head table and walked out of the ballroom, the whispers of the guests fading behind the heavy oak doors. I stepped into the quiet hallway, pulled up my contacts, and dialed the direct number for Marcus Vance, the chief legal counsel and trustee of the Whitaker commercial real estate empire. He answered on the second ring, his tone immediately alert when he heard the absolute coldness in my voice. I gave him a single, direct instruction: execute the immediate revocation clause on the estate venue and terminate the temporary family usage agreements effective right now. Marcus didn't question me. He simply stated he would be there in minutes. I leaned against the marble wall of the hallway, checking the clock on my phone. Outside, a light rain began to patter against the glass windows, matching the storm that was about to unfold inside. The staff moved past me nervously, sensing the heavy tension radiating from the corridor. For exactly 15 minutes, I stood there alone, watching the seconds tick away as the bass from the reception music thudded through the floorboards. Chloe truly believed she had stripped me of my dignity, entirely unaware that her words had just dismantled the very foundation of her new life. Right on time, the heavy glass front doors of the estate swung open. Marcus Vance walked in, dressed in a sharp black suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase that held the power to alter the course of the evening. He gave me a respectful nod as he passed, flanked by 2 private security officers. As the ballroom doors were thrown open once again, the music abruptly cut to a screeching halt. I walked back inside right behind them, watching Chloe's triumphant smile completely vanish as Marcus stepped up to the microphone. Marcus adjusted the microphone, the feedback echoing sharply through the silent ballroom. He pulled a set of stamped legal documents from his briefcase and began to speak in a booming, professional tone that commanded absolute attention. He announced that as the chief trustee of the Whitaker estate, he was executing an immediate administrative freeze on all unauthorized expenditures and assets connected to the evening's event. The grand historical estate we were standing in wasn't a public rental. It was a private property wholly owned by the family firm. Chloe's eyes widened in confusion, her face twisting as she looked at Leo for answers. But Leo was staring at the documents in Marcus's hands, his mouth open in silent horror. He knew exactly what those papers meant, even if his new bride didn't. Marcus pulled out a second document, directly addressing the newlyweds at the head table. He read aloud the terms of the temporary family usage agreements. The luxury penthouse they lived in, the high-end sports cars they drove, and even the executive title Leo held at the firm were not personal inheritances. They were corporate benefits granted entirely at the discretion of the estate's sole manager. And that sole manager was me. I stood at the back of the room, my arms crossed, watching the truth dismantle the illusion Chloe had built for herself. She had spent months convinced that marrying Leo meant inheriting an empire, believing that I was just an inconvenient obstacle she could insult and cast aside. She never bothered to look at the paperwork. She never realized that Arthur had left absolute control to me to protect the legacy from Leo's financial carelessness. The very ground they stood on, the luxury they flaunted, and the wedding they were celebrating were all entirely dependent on my goodwill. Goodwill that Chloe had just foolishly destroyed. The smug, victorious expression Chloe had worn just moments ago disintegrated into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Her breath hitched as she looked around the silent ballroom, realizing that every single eye in the room was now watching her spectacular downfall. She turned to Leo, her voice cracking as she demanded he do something to stop this humiliation. But Leo couldn't even look at her. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as the reality of their sudden financial ruin washed over him. He knew his wife's arrogant greed had just cost them everything. Chloe slammed her hands onto the head table, knocking over a crystal vase of white roses. She glared across the room at me, screaming that I couldn't do this, that she was family now, and that I was just a heartless fraud trying to steal what belonged to her husband. Her desperate screeching echoed off the high ceilings, shattering whatever remaining dignity she had left. The guests whispered fiercely, watching the beautiful bride completely unravel into a bitter, furious mess right before their eyes. I didn't say a word to her. I simply walked up to the head table, picked up my champagne glass one last time, and took a slow, deliberate sip. I looked down at Chloe, whose face was now tear-stained and twisted with rage, and then at Leo, who looked completely defeated. "You wanted me to leave this family for good, Chloe," I said softly, my voice cutting through her panic with absolute clarity. "I am granting your wish. I'm leaving, and I'm taking my empire with me." I turned around and walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, leaving them to face the immediate consequences of their own cruelty. 3 months have passed since that night, and the dust has finally settled on the ruins of Chloe's ambitions. Without my financial backing, the luxury penthouse was repossessed within weeks, and Leo was legally terminated from his executive position at the firm due to his ongoing complicity in Chloe's behavior. The last I heard, they had moved into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, both working entry-level jobs just to pay off the massive debt from the wedding vendors who were never reimbursed by the estate. Chloe's dreams of high society vanished entirely, replaced by the harsh reality of a life she actually had to earn. Meanwhile, I moved our corporate headquarters to a beautiful new high-rise downtown, expanding Arthur's legacy further than he ever imagined possible. Walking away from their toxicity wasn't an act of surrender. It was the ultimate liberation. I am thriving, surrounded by people who respect my hard work rather than covet my position. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you have done if you were standing in my shoes at that reception? Would you have waited 15 minutes? Or would you have walked out immediately? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of calm, calculated justice, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Thank you for watching until the very end.